This is my presentation on the normal operation, emergency operating and staff training in the Leisure Centre as a sports coach. As you can see, for starters, the scenarios, for example, the NOP coach running a futsal session in the sports hall. For the NOP, I'd take a register to count how many kids I've got. And then moving on to the EOP, you're coaching a session of futsal to a young bunch of kids, and then a fire breaks out. And then for the EOP, a fire breaks out and I'd get all the kids and then check them off on the register I did earlier to make sure that I have them all. And then the ST would be the staff procedure for a new apprentice. And for the ST, this is where a new apprentice would be taught what to do in case of a situation like this occurred again. So moving on to the NOP, which stands for Normal Operating Procedures. To start off with, you check the area which the sporting activity occurs during my activity. This is in place so that no accidents don't happen to the people under my care in the Leisure Centre, and that everybody that enters the area I am training in is safe. Yes, these are important because if you were not to clean up and there was still rubbish and sharp objects on the floor, there is risk of people getting injuries from the staff not following the normal operating procedures correctly. For example, if staff were to be using a mop for the toilets, they could not also use the same mop for the hallway because this can cause disease and carry out a mess. So down to the procedure, there are different coloured mops for different coloured areas so that disease is not carried out. It is safe for the environment. The colour code: red is toilets, blue general areas, green kitchen, and the yellow is blood, sick, etc. Now moving on to the EOP, which stands for Emergency Operating Procedures. The fire procedure. This procedure is in place because in case a fire happens in a leisure centre, every member of staff should know what to do and keep every member of the leisure centre safe. Yes, they are important due to the fact these alert people to the fire and where it is happening and keeps it in a controlled environment. If you don't have these procedures, then people are unaware of the actions they need to take to keep safe. People can panic as they don't know what to do in the situation. A sporting example of this is if had a bunch of kids running a futsal session, there is a fire, one member of staff would pull the fire alarm and the other member of staff would make sure that all of the children get out to the fire assembly point safely, where they would do a register when there to make sure all the children have got out safely. Other staff in the Leisure Centre would check all of the rooms to make sure that nobody is left in the building and it is if it is a false alarm or not. If staff follow the NOP, for example, no smoking policy, then nobody can throw a finished cigarette into rubbish and then cause a fire. So by following the NOP, they have prevented one way a fire can start. Moving on to serious injuries, the procedure is in place so that every member of staff knows what to do if a member of the Leisure Centre gets a serious injury. If anyone has an injury, then they can get treatment straight away or kept at a minimum injury so it does not start to get worse. If we didn't have this, then any injuries could get worse and at the worst lead to long-term injury or even death. Once staff have found out how serious the injury is, for example, bleeding, bruised or broken, then they have a procedure to go through to know how to treat the blood, for example, so they have no blood loss, then they will the broken bones. For example, if somebody had an open fracture, they would stop it bleeding by applying pressure and elevating it. As it is broken, then would have to support the broken bone. This is related with the staff training because as they learn first aid, they know what to do in a situation when there are injuries. Then moving on to the ST, which stands for staff training. This procedure makes sure that all staff does their job properly. For example, a first aider will be trained on first aid. This is important that staff know the rules and regulations of the building and they have insurance, because if there was a CRB check, then they could work with kids. First aid, for example, all staff in the Leisure Centre have to go on a 4-hour course every month to rebuild their memory of how first aid is taking place. For example, they learn how to use a defib CRP, filling reports and structures such as RICE, which stands for Rest, Ice, Compress and Elevate. All staff have to also learn the basic things such as greeting customers on the phone and when customers have entered the leisure centre. For example, hi, this is Portland Leisure Centre, how may I help? Basic things that they also have to do is locate the staff room, locate toilets, know where fire assembly point is, know where all fire alarms and extinguishers are. They have to know the smoking policy and point out all hazards, and if found any, make sure that they are fixed. And then moving on to a map that I drew of the sports hall. This shows where all the fire exits, first aid boxes would be, and also the alarms. As you can see, black boxes represent the fire exits, which there's one in each corner of the hall that's set from the top right. The green boxes represent first aid box, which is out of the map, which means it's in a cupboard. And the orange represents all of the fire alarms. The normal operating procedure for a coach is to go into the classroom before the children arrive and make sure that the likes of everything is tidy, nothing is out that can cause injury, and then make sure he knows where all fire alarms and all fire exits are, and then knows where to go once get out of the building, so would go to the fire assembly point. So once the kids have arrived, I would take a register to see who has come, because then if there was a fire, for example, I would know where all the fire alarms, exits and fire assembly point is, because the coach checked it before the children arrive. And then once evacuated and arrived at the fire assembly point, the coach would take the register again to make sure all the kids have got out safely.